Hey everybody, my name is Taylor Gibson, and this is the Gr8Wyte Experience. Hey everybody, welcome to the Gr8Wyte Experience, the show where I talk about anything and everything of interest. My name is Taylor Gibson. Thank you for joining us. Today's episode is a very special episode, as for the first time, the show will be exclusively looking at an album. And it's not just any album. This is an album that not only means quite a bit for myself, but also for the millions of people who loved this album back then and still hold it in such high regard in 2021. The album we'll be looking at today is the 1991 classic Nevermind by Nirvana, a record that is a true landmark in every sense, while being an album that really has stood the test of time, as millions of people continue to listen and praise Nevermind and Nirvana 30 years after the fact, whether they were the first wave of people who heard it or were a younger generation that discovered it on their own in the years following. For today's episode, I have a very special co-host joining me to do a full deep dive and a review on this album in question. And I know he's going to be a little embarrassed to hear this, but when I thought about doing this episode, I couldn't think of anybody else to do it with because he's influenced me so much and he's really helped shape my taste in music throughout my life. Please welcome to the show, my pop, Kenny Gibson. Dad, how you doing, man? Welcome to the show.
Thank you very kindly for having me on, son. And a very, very nice intro too. Thank you.
No worries, man. And like I said, I'm super happy that you can come on the show. Not only because this is your very first podcast guest ever on anything, but also because, like I said, you've been a huge influence on myself when it came to the taste of music that I have, while you being very open-minded to newer bands nowadays, given that I am much, much older. So I thought, honestly, this is a great album to talk about just because, like I said, it's such a landmark album. It's an album that people hold in such high regard. Now, I want to get your quick thoughts here because I actually want to start off this episode by talking about our own first impression of the band Nirvana. Because when I was growing up, I remember that this is a band that you and I were kind of divided on because I know, I like Nirvana. You didn't seem to be too crazy about the band. Now, why was that? Was it just the music didn't really do anything for you? They were super popular? What was it about them?
Yeah, they didn't pull me in. When I first heard it, I thought, okay, I'm not really hearing anything new or fresh. But then I stopped and I thought about it and I go, wait a minute. This is it felt like a resurgence of what I would have listened to back in high school with the Sex Pistols. And like listening to Nirvana, I listened to Smells Like Teen Spirit, which has a lot of energy. It has all the ingredients of a cake that the Sex Pistols would have baked back in 1977. So that's what pulls you in, is the sound, similar to other bands like Tool and bands that would draw me in. This band did not draw me in. It was never Smells Like Teen Spirit is, so I just thought, okay, now it's starting to draw me in. And then I saw the video. Then I thought, this is not just a song. This is an anthem for the city of Seattle. This is something that is because Soundgarden's Bad Motor Finger was released on the exact same day, which I thought, okay, this is really good. But the Seattle release of Bad Motor Finger also had the cover by Black Sabbath of Into the Void from Masters of Reality, which is what I would have listened to anyway. Kind of got off a bit there, going back to Smells Like Teen Spirit. I tip my hat to the band for what they did for the young people, gave them identity, gave the city its identity back, and drew people to the city economically because that's what the scene was. It wasn't Athens, Georgia. It wasn't New York. It wasn't LA because that was done. we're talking about Seattle, boys. Grab your duffel bag, get your checkered jacket on, because we're going to Seattle.
Exactly. And it's funny that you mentioned that Nirvana really did represent a lot of things for a lot of young people, because I think Henry Rollins put it best when talking about Kurt Cobain himself. He says Kurt Cobain and Nirvana came out at a time when an entire generation of people were depressed, bummed out, and here comes a guy who looks like them, comes from them, and sings to them and for them. I thought that perfectly summed it up right there.
He identified. The people identified with him. He identified with the people because he was one of theirs. So it's kind of like sending one of their friends on stage and can you please tell the rest of the world how we feel? And that's what he did. You know, and as we get into your podcast here, I'm sure we'll dive deeper into some of the darkness and some of the other things about the music. So
absolutely. And like I said, like this was definitely a band that you and I were very divided on. I know you kind of had more of a negative reaction to them, where when I first heard them, I'm trying to remember now, I think it was 2002, I was about 10 years old, and I was going down to Victoria with David and Derek and Annie Teresa. I think we were going to like Tea at the Empress or something one time, and we were going down to Malahat, and David, I don't know if he had it on CD or on the original iPod, but he looked at me, he asked me if I ever heard of Nirvana, and he played Smells Like Teen Spirit for the first time. And I know, like, and you've listened to music for so many years, and you'll know firsthand when you hear a song or a band that really relates, the first time you hear it, you're just like, who are these guys, and what the heck am I listening to? That was exactly what I heard Smells Like Teen Spirit for the first time. You know what, like I said, I'm big into music, but I never really had too many songs that just blew my mind the first time, and I was like, whoa, what is this? Because this was loud, this was heavy, very poppy in its structure and how it was written, but just sonically it just sounded like nothing that happened before. And I know we talk about it being such a timeless album, and it really did stand the test of time. Like, it's such a great song, and even 30 years after the fact, like, it still holds up today.
It's fresh, yeah. And the thing about myself personally, when it comes to listening to radio, which I don't listen to a lot of anymore, I was a huge KISW fan in Seattle. So KISW naturally fed the masses of the world with the album 10 by Pearl Jam. So I heard Alive. I thought, man, is that ever good? But it was actually a live version, I think, from the Paramount Theater before they even released the 10 album, which, as everybody knows, their first tour date for that album was the city of Victoria here. But I still... Yes, once again, I'm kind of getting off the Nirvana track here. I listened to KISW and I heard Nirvana, I heard Alice in Chains, which as you know, I'm a huge fan of even today.
Yep.
So when Nirvana hit the radio, it opened the doors for people to re-listen to Screaming Trees, and watch the movie Singles again, which a lot of people missed a lot of things in that movie.
Yep.
Which had nothing to do with Nirvana. However, it was about the Seattle scene, which I say openly and honestly, I really truly believe Nirvana is the reason why Seattle is still big on the map today.
100%. And, you know, even nowadays, and I'm the same way, like, I don't listen to a lot of radio, but even this past summer when I was driving down to Victoria in the work vehicle, and we had either The Zone, which is out of Victoria, or KISW, they still played Nirvana. And it's amazing how much that band is still relevant today.
Well, it's still in the rotation, right?
Yep.
And the reason why, because they don't have to do like we do here in Canada, and you have to pay 25% Canadian content or whatever to support everything, which I'm a fan of. Yeah, you want to sell your own product, but because Seattle had such a big, it was like a smorgasbord to pick from.
Yep.
And I know they always played one Rush tune every day because they were a huge Rush fan. And then after that, it was the Melvins. It was, everything from anything that Sub Pop would have created or had their DNA involved in. but it always defaulted back to Kurt Cobain. It's always, yeah, it was just one of those things where he was, to me, he's the David Bowie of music for the kids from the 90s, right? And I don't mean glam rock or anything. Like, I just meant, like, when people saw David Bowie, they go, whoa, whoa. It's like listening to Jimi Hendrix, and then 10 years later, we got Eddie Van Halen.
Yep.
It's not about who's the best guitar player, it's about who's your favorite guitar player. But the whole thing is Kurt Cobain identified with the people, they identified with him, and now KISW has a free ticket to the prom because Nirvana is going to make them big and bigger, and MTV and everybody goes. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny that you mentioned them playing it on KISW, because I remember even back in the day, this was like after I first heard Nirvana for the first time, it drove me crazy following hearing that song, because I could hear it in my head, but I didn't know who it was from. And
Right.
then I think Q13 Fox, they were playing an ad for KISW on one of their TV spots, and they used part of the song in the commercial. And I was like, I know that song. What is the name of that song? And it wasn't until a few months later when their Greatest Hits album came out and they had an advertisement for it and they played it and they had the name. And I was just like, that's that song that I thought of.
Right. Yeah. The Nirvana t-shirts, like their merchandise, were like the big happy faces. Everyone had recognized it from a distance, whether you're in Los Angeles or whatever. It's just like, oh, wow, these guys, yeah, what's going on? It was like this Seattle mania.
Yeah, it was. Well, it's funny. The happy face for Nirvana, an easy comparison is it's such a recognizable symbol. It's like the tongue for the Rolling Stones.
Absolutely, yeah. Without being commercial.
Yep.
It's an identity to a group, not a brand. But Nirvana, to me personally, is a brand of Seattle. They're homegrown. People go, yeah, those guys are from my neighborhood. Yay!
Yep.
So
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's even like being up here in Canada where you have a pro athlete that comes from your city. It's like when Steve Nash came from Victoria, or Jamie Benn, who played in the NHL, comes from Victoria. It's just like the city just gravitates to these guys because they were born here, produced here, and now look at them. They've gone on to do great things and they're representing the city.
Bob Rock's a prime example from the Payolas, but more recognized by the documentary for Metallica. Bob Rock's, he's from Victoria, right?
Yep. He went to Belmont, I believe.
Went for Belmont High, yeah. So him and
David Foster.
David Foster went to Mount Doug here in Gordon Head. So, yeah. So, I mean, yeah. It's just like one of your own from your town, right? So
Exactly. Now, I did mention the Nirvana's Greatest Hits album, and I remember back in the day, after I found that out, I remember I asked you for it, and this is the first time you ever looked at me and you're like, oh, son, really? Nirvana? These guys? And I was like, oh, come on, Dad, like, I heard the song, it's cool, and you begrudgingly bought me the album, but I remember you refused to play it in your truck.
yeah, because I think the people at Lyle's place would have been proud to know that you probably still have it. Yeah.
You know what's funny is that I actually found that CD. I actually found it. It's right behind me.
That's too funny.
20 years after the fact, I still have it, man. Like, it's such a pivotal part for myself. And I know, like, later on in life, like, I later bought Nevermind by Nirvana. Now, I can't recall if I bought it before I saw the VH1 Classic Album episode on it or after it. So,
Right.
by the way, it's a great episode. If anybody out there hasn't seen it, I highly recommend it. VH1 did some really great episodes with the classic albums they did. What did they do? I think Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. They did Joshua Tree by U2, Black Album by Metallica, as we're talking about Bob Rock. Some classic albums they did. And
Yeah.
when talking about 2002, and the one thing about Nirvana that really, as much as Nirvana has stood the test of time, the one big thing that it spawned was Dave Grohl. And 2002 was the year that, I refer to it as the year of Grohl, because I heard Nirvana for the first time, Queens of the Stone Age for the first time, and then I discovered the Foo Fighters afterwards. Like within 7 months of each other.
And here's an interesting point. I mean, VH1, they did the research on all these bands that you just mentioned. They did the research before they just went out nilly-nilly and said this, that, and the next thing. But you just mentioned a band, Queens of the Stone Age. Okay, from that band, Caius was born. Queens of the Stone Age and everything, Grohl. It's like going back to Seattle with all the different Mud Honeys and Mother Love Bone and all the people that built, and then what you're left with is Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
You know, and I've always told people this. The thing about the Seattle scene and the English, like the British scene, is they collaborate. They're not against each other. They're not looking for supremacy or trying to bump somebody off the chart. They all worked together like a brotherhood in Seattle. And they have all kinds of collaboration going on where you could just sit in and say, hey man, can I hang out or something? Yeah, sure, sounds really exciting. Hang out, So back in the day in England, you would get Mark Bolan or Jimmy Page or someone just showing up at the studio and people are like, oh my God, Jimmy Page is here. Oh yeah, just like, so I'm just trying to allude to the brotherhood of musicianship and sisterhood in Seattle. It was a community of people that cored together. They came together to make up a core scene, and luckily enough, people like Dave Grohl, who is not from Seattle but made his way through here, and because Grohl's not their original drummer, right?
No, Nirvana, I think, had a couple of drummers, if I'm not mistaken. I know on their first album, Bleach, it was Chad Channing, who was then replaced by Dave Grohl. But in between, Chad I think he either got fired or quit, I can't remember, and Dave Grohl joining. Like, Nirvana did tours with Dan Peters from Mudhoney. They got Dale Crover from the Melvins to do shows with them, and that's how they ended up with Dave Grohl. But even talking about Dave Grohl not being from Seattle, another big key factor in the city of grunge is the fact Eddie Vedder is also not from Seattle. He's from San Diego.
San Diego, that's right. Yeah. But once again, when these people come to Seattle, they see the scene, they see the people, they go, hey, I think I can be part of this, and I think I'm going to fit in just fine, which Vedder has. And I think he's the face of Eddie Vedder is probably just as important as Jerry Cantrell or Dave Grohl, or I was going to say Dave Navarro.
Dave Navarro. Well, I mean, Jane's Addiction did have a big influence on the alternative scene in the 90s, so...
Huge influence. Harry Farrell was a huge influencer long before social media influencers.
Yep. Just look at Lollapalooza.
That is one example, but even doing Porno for Pornos, hitting the studio like Nirvana when they hit the studio doing Bleach, they were fine-tuned. They were ready to go. It's push the play button, the red light comes on, let's go, you guys. And I don't think it took them very long to do Bleach. The album.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was 30 hours or something to do the whole record start to finish.
Yes. So your chops have to be honed, and you have to be prepared mentally, physically, and sometimes keeping your spirits up at the same time, because there's a lot of things going on, interferences. But these guys, just like Perry Farrell and these people, they came with a purpose, and they're going to record, and we're going to do it good. Let's do it. And the people behind the mix desk, they sense this, and then they become part of the band, like Bob Rock, like the scene with the Beatles and everything. They had George Martin as part of the production and part of the band, right? So, and we can get into talking about that a little bit later on with Albini and that So.
Well, and I know that you mentioned when talking about the Seattle scene, it was definitely a brotherhood. And I remember a few years ago when Pearl Jam's documentary 20 came out, and Chris Cornell was in it, and he was talking about, I can't remember if it was Johnny or Joey Ramone was talking about the Seattle scene, and he says, man, this would never happen in New York. Like, we would always try and top each other. We try and screw each other over. In Seattle, it was not like that, where it was like cross-pollination, where it was, you had Malfunction that turned into Mother Love Bone, that turned into Pearl Jam. You had these guys that were either seeing these bands live or touring with these bands, and there was a brotherhood. And even when talking about Cobain's suicide in 1994, even nowadays, when you see the documentary for Pearl Jam, or you see some of these interviews like Dave Grohl has done in the past, some of these other musicians, you get a real sense that it wasn't like they lost a band member or a friend; they lost a brother.
They did, yeah. And the city of Seattle lost an image, and the image was the face of Kurt Cobain, which everyone can identify with. They just look at that cat and they say, "Oh, wow, that was what's his name? Oh, Kurt Cobain, right from Seattle." Doesn't matter what part of the world you are in. Music is the one thing that connects the world together, and I think Kurt Cobain did a really good job of that. Like I say, even today, I'm not a huge Nirvana fan, but I'm a huge fan of what Kurt Cobain as an individual did for the young people, and ultimately sacrificed himself. He's not a martyr, don't get me wrong, not a martyr, but he did sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, because I don't think owning fast cars and big houses was his thing.
No.
I don't think the materials meant much to him. I think he could have gotten better help to deal with his personal demons, and I don't think our lovely girl Courtney Love helped the matters any, but I'm not going to get into her.
No.
Thank God, because we're not. But he is the image of grunge. He always will be. And both Chris Novoselic and Dave Grohl still to this day speak very highly, and miss their brother.
Yep.
And which is part of the brotherhood, like you mentioned, in Seattle.
Well, the fact that Novoselic just altogether just quit music after Cobain died, it really goes to show how much of an effect it had on him personally.
Yeah, and Dave Grohl, because Grohl took his bit of a hiatus there too, but it's I guess the same could be said for Paul McCartney. Going, okay, I can't rock anymore, and then putting out more albums than the Beatles ever did, right? Mm-hmm. So, anyway, but we are very fortunate to see Grohl carry on with his Foo Fighter band and also influencing other people, right? So, but Kurt Cobain gave the kids an identity, right? And gave them new hope, and that's the part of this band that I really, really like. The music, I can take it or leave it. Like I say, when it comes to Seattle grunge bands, Alice in Chains will always be my favorite because I'm a huge Jerry Cantrell fan.
Yep.
Both his singing and his guitar playing, I think it's absolutely ripping. But historically, when you look back at the Seattle scene, Hendrix, Hart, the Ventures, Paul Revere and the Raiders. This is long before grunge, right?
Yeah.
So,
but even in the years previous, so like you had Metal Church, you had Queensryche that also came out of Seattle as well too.
Absolutely, but once again, at a time where there was a small scene of big hair bands.
Yep.
So.
Believe me, we'll get into that. We will get into that in a little bit for sure. But I guess the one personal experience that I have, and I think you and I both have this, back about in 2012, like we went down to Seattle for the first time together, and I remember we went to the Music Project.
Yeah.
Do you recall, was the Nirvana exhibit there at that time? I don't remember if it was. I remember in 2014 it was when Thomas and I went down, but it wasn't there in 2012 from what I remember.
No, they were just building it. In fact, they had some Nirvana stuff, but it was I think there was more stuff like from Ann and Nancy Wilson and Who else did they have? They had some. Yeah.
Yeah, they had some grunge stuff, but it wasn't
Yes, they did.
overbearing.
It wasn't Nirvana though. That was the funny thing. It was
No.
all. I think there was a couple of shots of Pioneer Square when they were doing some filming there for the singles movie. There was a picture of like the Hendrix thing with all his guitars and
Yep.
all that. But I was always very impressed with the outfits that they had from Ann and Nancy Wilson from the Heart album with Barracuda and everything on
Yeah.
it.
Which is amazing because you would think that after all this time they wouldn't even have that stuff anymore.
You would think, but because they were costumes, they weren't things that they wore on stage.
Yeah.
It was all for promotional photography for the album. Even some of the stuff that Howard Leese, one of the guitar players, they had some of his stuff. Roger Fisher, the lead guitar player from Heart, big fan of that. I mean, when Heart came to Vancouver and Victoria, you could almost see them every weekend. It was they were more Canadian than they were anything, and if anybody ever kicked anyone's ass at that time, it was Heart. It was just like, wow, this is next level. So it was really cool. But going back to your question about the Nirvana stuff, no, there was not nearly as much what there is today.
No.
At the music project.
And I know, like, the music project. Well, sorry, I was gonna say, like, the music project definitely has a lot of funding, just because I guess the now late Paul Allen was big in funding that, and the Allen estate still funds that. But even when I was down there in 2014, like, it was just amazing seeing all the stuff from, like, they had the sweater from the Teen Spirit video, they had some of the instruments like Pat Smear's guitar from the Unplugged session, they had some of these old guitars and the drum kits, and it's like, that's really cool. Like, that's a piece of history right there that you're looking at, that, you know, you see it on MTV or Much Music, I guess, up here in Canada, or Much More Music, or now with YouTube, you're seeing that and you're like, that's cool that stuff still exists today.
Yeah, I mean, even if you mentioned the Unplugged thing there, even if you were to watch it again today, you'd go, wow, that's amazing. I thought their Unplugged version, out of all the different Unplugged versions of people's music, I thought theirs was the best.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's still highly regarded as that too.
Oh, good. I think if anyone watched that, they could see there was a lot of hurt in the face of that fellow Kurt Cobain. It's almost like he was just trying to get through the music so he could get the heck off the stage and get back home. Because I believe that was all done in New York.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was filmed like nearly months before he passed away.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that's kind of an eerie thing, right? So April 5th, is that when he passed away?
April 5th is when he passed. I think April 8th is when they found him.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, oh man, oh man.
I know.
I just remember the people here in Victoria that I was working with when I was going, oh my God, man, you can't believe Kurt Cobain, he's gone, man. You know?
Yep.
It was like no one could believe it. It was just how could that happen, man?
Yeah.
It's just like, how can you be at the height of your... It's the same as Chris Cornell, right?
It's true.
Wow. Anyway.
Yeah.
But
even talking about Cobain's passing, and it's funny because even in your lifetime, like, music has lost some really big names. Like, like Elvis passed away, John Lennon was murdered, and then Cobain ended up taking his own life. Like, that's three big icons of music right there that all passed away.
Yeah. Well, as a drummer myself, you know, John Bonham dying, that was almost like, you know, the Big Bopper and Buddy Holly and
or even now with Neil Peart.
Now Neil Peart's gone. I go, holy smokes, really? Wow. And I realize, you know, like myself, we're all getting a little bit older than that, and but it's a reality. And I think the biggest reality, pardon me, of a musical person dying was David Bowie. I'm just going, wow, that is insane. So, and it's not about the fact that they're not going to write any more music. It's just you'll never ever get a chance to see them again or anything, or
Yep.
unless there's some kind of weird avatar thing that they put on stage. And but
Yeah.
and speaking of avatars, ABBA is coming back. I just saw it on TV.
Oh
ABBA.
God. Can you imagine,
Yes.
man? Like, it's amazing. Eh? Even nowadays, like, that's now become a thing where these
It is.
musicians who have passed away, they're now getting avatars on stage. Like, you know,
Yeah,
Tupac a few years ago. Now you've
yeah.
got it with Kurt. It's just like, Jesus, man.
Yeah, it's like Bjorn again with ABBA. So I remember seeing the Hank Williams Jr. video, and he had his dad in the video. I thought, wow, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
And you know the only two musics I like, son, is rock and roll. So when it's all about country, man, I just go, wow, that was well done, well done. So,
But I think that's the
Yeah.
one thing I appreciate about yourself, Dad, is that you, even though, like, yes, you're a big rock music fan, like, you've always been very open-minded when it came to other forms of music, whether it be from rock to electronica to other forms of music. If you hear something that's kind of cool, you're like, oh, that's kind of neat. Like, you would hear, say, a band like Ministry that a lot of people would be like, this is way too abrasive and over the top, and you're like, this stuff's awesome, man.
yeah, and trying to be open minded and stuff. I think it's important. Like I've always told you, I feel personally responsible for techno music.
Yep.
So, and the thing about techno music with me is it's got a hard driving beat to it. It's just like thumping, thumping, banging. And it's just like this gets you going. This stuff. I mean, you listen to "Just Came to Say Hello" or whatever that. But I can't even find my notes on that girl that sang that. But it's very thumpy, pumping, and it's just like as many 1176 compressors you can put on one track. It is pumping. It is thumping. It is just like wow. I mean, it's brick wall limited. This song is hard, but once again, it's whether it's Post Malone or somebody like that. Like I'm not a snob. I do like pop music and everything, and I did appreciate Nirvana. And I do have my own bag of what I like to listen to, but some days I just want to dime just one fix by Ministry.
Yep. Especially a live version, which is always awesome.
Oh yes, and I know a lot of people will have it in their playlist when they're on the treadmill. They'll have why not?
Oh.
People say, well, how can you listen to that, man? It just sounds like it's getting looped and looped and looped. I say, hey, techno is one big loop. The song can go on all night.
Yep.
And anyway, so once again, I think I'm kind of deviating from our mark here, but
That's all right.
yeah. So I always wanted you and Kevin and Sean to be open-minded to what you thought your music brand should be, not what I thought it should be. But I said, hey, son, check this out. What's that, Dad? It's Undertow by Tool. Who's Tool? Have a listen. Take it for a spin.
Yep. Well, I mean, Tool was always a band you always played right from when I was a little kid, so I always heard it all the time, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things when I first heard Undertow, Sober, the song Sober on Undertow, I just go, wow, this is cool, And just like Paul Diamore, the bass player, that wasn't a fit for him, so he moved on.
Yep, and they got a better bass player, and especially if you listen to the later records like A Lot of Rallis, 10,000 Days, or even their most recent record, where Justin Chancellor very much is front and center of that band. Like, he really, you can tell he has a big hand in those songs.
But it's absolutely amazing. If people don't think that he does, you've got to go back, like you say, to those albums you just mentioned and listen to the dynamic playing and the rhythm section. Like John Lord, the keyboardist for Deep Purple, the old British band, he was Deep Purple. I loved Richie Blackmore, but John Lord's the dynamic rhythm section of the band. Justin Chancellor, like you say, same thing. Adam Jones brings in all this guitar work that supports that beautifully, and of course, my favorite drummer, Johnny Carey.
Beautiful guy.
Yeah, it's just like, and then even their last album, I thought was his best drumming at this point.
Yep.
I really think he just drummed the crap out of that Seven Tempest or whatever it was.
Tempest?
But once again, yeah, Tempest, yeah. Justin Chandler stepping up out of that role, same as the drummer originally that Nirvana had. It's just when you're not a fit, the band will tell you.
Yep.
And the problem with the band that I was with in high school is the drummer we had was really good friends with everybody else. And good friends that are crappy musicians make crappy music with good friends.
Well, it's hard to be subjective too,
That's
right? Because you're friends with them.
Yes, of course.
Yep.
You know, you couldn't say to the guy, hey, do you mind taking some drum lessons? Lars Ulrich. We could go on for another week talking about him.
Yep.
People talk about the late Charlie Watts. You know, if people don't think this guy was a good drummer,
The Rolling Stones would have him.
check his bank account.
Yeah. Well, believe me, if he wasn't a good drummer, the Rolling Stones wouldn't have him for
No.
60 years.
No, they would tell you, listen, you're not cutting it here. Same with a lot of Ringo Starr's drumming, and Charlie Watts has got the same thing. His dynamic sound, like his snare hits are late. They're not out of time. They're just a little bit behind, the beat. You know, Day Tripper. You know, we're taking a guy like Ringo Starr, who's actually a left-handed drummer, and he's playing a right-handed drum kit. That's why everything's light, because he's got to swing from one side to the other awkwardly. But John Lennon says, I love that, man. We're not going to change it. We're going to keep that in. I like it. It's a little bit late. It fits.
Yep.
It serves the music. It serves the groove really, really well. When it comes to Dave Grohl playing with Smells Like Teen Spirit, that's what caught me right from the beginning. The drums coming in. It's just like, wow. And if you ever listen to Barracuda by heart, same thing. You know, you hear Roger Fisher doing the old chun 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 chun, but then when the drums comes in, it's like, whoa, that's great. So that's what drew me into Nirvana, to give them a second listen, be more objective about what I was listening to.
100%. And believe me, like, there's so many bands that you mentioned there that honestly I could do episodes on for days. Now, just moving away from Nirvana for a second and just talking about the genre of grunge, because grunge is a genre, while being very associated with dark and depressing, at the time was such a welcome change to the mainstream rock scene that had been dominating the previous decade, when you had groups like A Poison, Warrant, Bon Jovi, these over-the-top hair metal bands that were just taking over, and then you have these bands who were so stripped down and took it very seriously, and now they're the ones in charge, and they're left behind. And
it wasn't overproduced. You know, it wasn't a polished scene like David Coverdale or something, right? So I think the timing was just perfect. Like I say, I alluded back in the beginning of your show about the Sex Pistols, on how the Nevermind the Bollocks came in, and there was plenty of new wave or punk or whatever you want to call that genre, whatever you deem it to be. There was the New York Dolls, you know, all the David Johansen stuff. But now here's Nevermind the Bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols, and should it not be Nevermind the Bollocks, here's Nirvana?
Yeah, because honestly, Nirvana or Nevermind was that album for the 90s. It was the album that was so revolutionary that you can listen to it. It's very much like Nevermind the Bollocks, is where you hear it and you're just like, wow, that's an amazing. But especially when you have the perspective of where music was at the time. Like I said, like even when Nirvana's Nevermind came out, you know, it wasn't like these bands just all of a sudden popped up. It's not like Alice in Chains all of a sudden popped up. Soundgarden obviously all of a sudden out of nowhere popped up. These bands have been working it for years. It was just that it was underground, and it hit right at the perfect time when the audience wanted something different. They were just tired of, you know, I Want Action Tonight or Shot to the Heart. They want something that's real, and that's what these bands gave them.
And I think Sub Pop took that underground scene and said, let's make something of this, man. This is good, you know. So there was a lot of good music and a lot of good bands back in the 90s. There was still GNR. There was REM. There's some really big scene. I mean, even Depeche Mode.
Metallica?
Okay, Metallica. Both of my hands are raised in the air right now. Of course, Metallica. What was I thinking? Because, like, even Tool were only coming into their own back in the. But Nirvana goes back to and Soundgarden, and like you say, the Seattle scene goes back to the 80s.
Yep.
It's not like, all of a sudden 91 appears, and where did all these albums come from? Who's doing this? Who's responsible? Well, the Brotherhood of Seattle is responsible for this, and with even the Canadian band Rush would have never got anything if it wasn't for a Cincinnati radio station that heard Working Man, and they did not mention they were from Canada, or else that would have just got squashed.
Yeah, because there's always that stigma around it, like, oh, this band comes from Canada. Like, come on, they can't be any good.
No, most certainly not. Yeah, I mean, what do they load their gear on a sled with Huskies pulling it to every venue? Is that what, no, absolutely not. So, and I know in America in general, when they had the big scenes in Athens, the big scene in New York, they all realized we've got to get our sorry asses to Seattle or else we're not going to make it, because no one's listening to anybody else other than something from Seattle.
Yeah, but even look at other scenes in the Midwest of the United States, where it'd be Chicago or even Minneapolis, right? Where in the 80s where you had Prince and you had Morris Day in the time that was coming out of Minnesota. And now, like, all these artists are, like you said, they're all going to Seattle, because Seattle at the time was not a flyover state, but it was definitely an outpost. Like, bands just didn't play Seattle, and even like Mark Arm from Mudhoney was saying that's why a lot of these bands ended up forming, just because a lot of bands weren't showing up and they wanted to just entertain themselves.
Yeah, I mean, even the smaller venues like at the Off Ramp and all these other places, like we're talking about Seattle bands. I'm a huge fan, and you know who I'm going to say.
Grunge Truck?
Grunge Truck. Huge fan of Grunge Truck. So I'm driving home from work, and I've got Grunge Truck timed in my service vehicle. And these guys pull up beside me going, hey, man, who is that? I said, it's Grunge Truck. Yeah, that's who it is. And I said, then it dawned on them. Oh, yeah, right. So they get it, right? I know they never got the notoriety and everything and stuff like that, like the other bands did. Same with Candlebox.
Oh, right? Believe me, we'll definitely talk about Candlebox and those bands in a bit. But going back to just talking about grunge here as a genre, and the one thing, like I said, even though it's always been associated with being dark and depressing, and while a lot of those bands definitely shared a lot of the same traits, I always found that none of those bands really sounded like Nirvana was more of a punk band, Pearl Jam was like a classic rock band, Alice in Chains took a more of a metal influence, Soundgarden took a Black Sabbath 70s rock influence. Yeah, they had certain elements, but they all had their own distinct aspects about them. No,
they did. They were unique. So their sound, although, like you say, it comes from the grunge genre, I think it's like when people are trying to describe where Tool should fit in. I do not believe Tool is a heavy metal band. I think they're like Led Zeppelin. I think they're just a hard rock band. And even Led Zeppelin itself, 70% of Led Zeppelin music is acoustic.
Yeah.
So people are going, okay.
But if you listen to them on the radio, it doesn't sound like that, because all you hear is either Black Dog or rock and roll.
Mm-hmm. And if I can make a mention about Whole Lotta Love by Led Zeppelin, if you listen to close to the end of Whole Lotta Love, there's actually 2 guitar mistakes in it. But hey, this is Led Zeppelin. This is Jimmy Page.
Yep.
He is rock and roll royalty, and if he wants to leave a mistake in the recording,
that's up to him.
That's up to him. So that is the approach that Kurt Cobain took. He said, here we are. If you don't like me, F off. If you do, dime it.
100%. Up, baby. Yeah, and there's even one of the tracks where he does leave a guitar mistake in there, and I'll talk about when we talk about that song.
Oh, perfect, yeah.
But when talking about grunge as a genre, but Nirvana's role in it was always kind of odd to me because, while yes, they were the ones that kicked down the door, they were the band that were just seen as a band, not the band. And definitely, while within the Seattle scene, they were definitely known, but back in the day, like, if all you had to base on was their first album, you would have never thought Nirvana was going to be able to break the door down. When you hear bands like Soundgarden that was already on a major label, or Mudhoney that was really building momentum to kick the door down, and all of a sudden here comes Nirvana with this very polished record that's very poppy and very heavy, and it kicks down the door instead.
And even Pearl Jam, who's Sony grabbed, right?
Yep.
Sony were huge. Sony still is huge. People don't realize how big Sony Corporation is. They're beyond. They're way beyond just music, right?
Yep.
But like you mentioned about grunge itself, grunge is not just a genre of music. It's a scene. It's a whole culture, and it was based in one city, and anywhere else, no, it wouldn't fly. You can head to Detroit and create a grunge scene. Nope. No, sorry. You best get your Doc Martens and your checkered shirt and shorts and go back to Seattle, buddy. So Temple of the Dog, right? Lends itself to the brotherhood. How they still share a common bond with Andrew Woods, right? They're honoring Andrew Woods, who's part of their friend. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Grunge music. So what are we looking at here? September 24th. Is that the 30th anniversary?
100%. Yeah, so at the time of this recording, it is currently September 5th. So obviously when this episode drops, it'll be September 24th, 30th anniversary of the album. And I thought it was such a perfect day to do it, too.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, it's although we're 19 days out, this whole band Nirvana will be talked about 1,019 years after we're gone.
100%.
Right?
Man.
Yeah, because it's like I say, historically, when you look back in rock and roll, you had the Yardbirds, you had Led Zeppelin. After that, you had who's next? And we're all looking around, going boom, Van Halen. So Nirvana is. I look at it. I go Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, Kurt Cobain, in that order, and it would have been Paul McCartney and the Beatles prior to that, obviously, not just Paul McCartney. So that and the Rolling Stones. So those are the four major food groups in music today. As much as Michael Stipes would like to think he's at the top.
Yeah.
So I do like REM. I'm a huge REM fan.
But I mean, REM also had such an influence on Nirvana too, right? When
the Beatles
had a
huge.
Oh yes, but even when they were doing In Utero, like you can tell, the best example was their Unplugged album, and Michael Stipe got on record saying that Kurt was thinking of doing more of that kind of stuff. So 2 final notes I want to do before we get into talking about, just giving our quick thoughts on the album of pre-re-listening to doing this episode, is I want to quickly talk about the success of Nirvana, because I always think, now that we have the power of hindsight, Nirvana's success really was a blessing and a bit of a curse on the rock scene. And like we've already talked about it being a blessing, like I said, it gave rock a much needed shot in the arm. But I want to talk about the flip side of that, and that is how it was a curse, because once Nirvana came out and once Nirvana got popular, record labels found out there's a formula to how to copy these bands. And that's when you found bands that had instant success right about with watered down groups. And, well, who are some of these bands? Well, Bush, there's a big example right there. Silverchair, Candlebox, bands like that, right? Like bands that, they kind of sound like Nirvana, but they're a little bit watered down, and they're basically, I don't want to say they were puppets, but they were definitely just lesser bands to the originals.
Well, yeah, the thing is when they were doing Frog Stomp, not Nirvana, but the band you just
Silverchair.
mentioned. Yeah, Silverchair. Everybody behind the mixed console are probably looking at each other going, we're going to continue this because these kids paid for this. But you know what? They are not Nirvana. And that's what's selling. And you say Curses versus Notoriety or whatever. I think the band itself was cursed, not the music. I think it was cursed by people trying to sell them short. You know, people saying, "Oh, listen," you know, like the whole fame thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think there's many victims, just like Britney Spears and people like that, who were just kids and they were preyed upon. And I personally feel that some people preyed upon Nirvana and took advantage of them to a real fault. You know, just like when Nikki Sixx and the boys from Crew were going through their craziness, and Doc McGee did everything in his power to keep them alive, literally, like literally alive.
Yeah, he said if you send them to Europe, they're going to come home dead.
Yeah, and it's not because he had a vested interest in them financially, but he also had a vested interest in them as human beings.
Yep. Now, the one final note I want to talk here about the genre itself, and I don't know if this is a bit of a hot take to say this, but honestly, I think had Kurt Cobain not died in 1994, honestly, the genre itself, I think, would have just died out completely on its own, because, you know, when you look at music, like, there's only so much of that dark, depressing music you can do before people are just tired of it. They're tired of things being so heavy and serious all the time. And I know when you look at the mid-90s, post Kurt passing away, well, what came after it? Green Day put out Dookie, Hootie and the Blowfish came out, Collective Soul came out, No Doubt came out. These not watered down bands, but bands that were a lot more lighter. Like, they weren't dark all the time.
Yeah, like even when you listen to like Mr. Jones by the Counting Crows,
Mm-hmm.
these are lifting people back up, and it's almost like pulling them back out of a hole. You know, like you say, I don't truly believe that Nirvana would have gone the distance because there is no comparison to Dave Grohl's band today as Nirvana was. They're two different things, two different animals, two different sounds, two different approaches, two different mindsets. And Dave Grohl would say, no, Nirvana, we done that. It's done.
Yep.
Okay, it's over with. Now you're talking about would it be sustainable to have Nirvana go through? No, because you're just coming out of STP. Now you're going into Velvet Revolver, that sort of thing,
yeah.
And you've got other things going on with Tool. Well, not just with hard rock or grunge rock, but music in general, right? Pop music, you know, Taylor Swift and. Katy Perry and all these people, and half the people I can barely remember. But the whole thing is something like even Justin Bieber, and I don't mean even, but there's a place for these people, and they will knock everybody else off the charts, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Seekers, way back, the Aussie band, the Seekers, when they did Georgie Girl, knocked the Beatles off the chart. And they were nothing like the Beatles. However, it was fresh, it was new. It's time to move over Beatles. We got the Seekers, right?
Yep.
So, I think the Nirvana scene would have not went the distance. The same as Jimi Hendrix. I don't believe Jimi Hendrix would have had anything left to give, right?
No, but I think even by 1994, like, it was kind of there. You can almost kind of see it fading out in its own, because by 94, Alice in Chains, like, Lane Staley was already deep into heroin by that time. Pearl Jam in 95 was fighting with Ticketmaster, so there's a big thing that they had to do. Obviously, Soundgarden a few years later disbanded. Nirvana, I think if Kurt was still alive, Nirvana would have just broken up, because if there was always rumblings that there was infighting with those guys, and how much influence was Courtney Love on that. Kurt wanted to do other things. So honestly, I agree with you. I don't know if Nirvana would have been sustainable, just because I think the band would have just came to an end.
I honestly think Courtney Love to Nirvana is Yoko Ono to the Beatles. People would say BS to that, but when you have someone like Yoko Ono influencing one of the most influential musicians of all time,
Yep.
John Lennon, and then she could say to him, John, give that up. And, oh, yeah, all right, love.
Yep.
And then everyone's blaming her. No, don't blame Yoki. Just, think about the artist, the decisions the artist made. If we're going to blame McCartney Love for Kurt Cobain's demise, I think that's a little bit unfair. Personally, I don't know the backstory to that. But I did like Maynard James Keenan's t-shirt that said Free Francis Bean.
Yep.
So now bands and other bands like Tool, big bands, realize the inside skinny of what's going on. It's probably more than what you and I both know on this podcast. So it's not for me to play judge and jury here for Courtney Love, but the whole thing is I believe Kurt Cobain would have, like you said, son, just said, yeah, I'm tired.
It's enough. Yeah.
It's enough, okay? You guys do your own thing, especially if they're not contractually obligated to whoever their major label would have been at that time.
Yeah, I think it was Geffen. I think DGC.
Geffen, yeah, David Geffen's bunch, yeah. And I think Geffen would have said to them, yeah, okay, you know what? It's time to tap out here, you guys, because Geffen cut GNR a lot of slack.
Yeah, because GNR made him a lot of money.
GNR made him a canoe load of money, and, smart business people like David Geffen would have let Kurt Cobain just slide, not like what happened to Creedence Clearwater Revival with John Fogerty, where the whole band went against him, and the record label only sued him and not the band. They went after John Fogerty, not Stu Cook and the rest of the boys, and even John's brother. So, once again, got off the subject there. So David Geffen would have said to him, listen, yeah, you guys slide. Hey, thanks for making me some money, and well done, by the way. Carry on.
Yep. So we'll just quickly give our thoughts here on the album itself, re-listening for this album. Honestly, I hadn't listened to Nevermind the whole way through in a little while, and honestly, when it comes to albums like this that I haven't heard in a long time, I'm always thinking, okay, is it gonna hold up as well as I remember? And honestly, it still does. To me, I think it still does. It was easily one of these records that was easily the best album of '91. That's no argument there. And I would consider it in the top 3 best rock albums, if not number 1 of the '90s. I've already mentioned how it doesn't sound like a product of any year. Even the production doesn't sound like this. It just sounds so crisp and clear, and it gave a blueprint for how rock bands will produce their records for the next 30 years.
Okay, so you were talking about the sonic delivery. Mm-hmm. Is this, what's his name?
Butch Vig?
Butch Vig, yeah. Do we owe it to him? Or are we looking about the mastering house where would have been sent out?
I think the mastering more than anything, right? Because it's so crisp and clear. But I think Butch had it was many factors. Butch Vig, where they recorded it, who mixed it, all that stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah, and if you don't have a properly mixed production, then the mastering house would just go, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? Because remember, Pro Tools, it was Slow Tools back in the day.
Yep. And there was definitely one of the songs that they cut on Slow Tools back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just before we did
editing, but that's funny.
Yeah. So before doing this album, Dad, what was your kind of your overall? Because I think you had the album on cassette back in the day, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I did. I did have it on cassette, along with the Smithereens, another one of your favorites from.
That's such an underrated band too, man. The Smithereens.
Oh, so it is. Yes, I did have it on cassette. But then I had all my stuff, even the Melvins, Stoner Witch, all that stuff. I had it on cassette.
Yeah, and then I ended up getting it all myself years later.
And, anyway, and COC and everything.
Yep. So anyway, we're going to take a really quick break here on the Gr8Wyte Experience, and we will come back and talk about Nevermind track by track. Coming right back. Okay, we are back. So, Dad, I know for the past hour or so we were just talking about Nirvana and Grunge and some of the great stuff we got to talk about. Now, the big reason we got together today, we've got to talk about the album, Nevermind itself. Now, before we get into the album track by track, I'm actually going to go over a couple of production notes about the album. So, Nevermind was released September 24th, 1991. It was recorded at Sound City in Van Nuys, California. And some of the other records, and it's a very well-known studio, known for the Neve console. There was a documentary came out, I believe in 2010 or 2011, that Dave Grohl himself actually produced. Some of the records that were done there include Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, a lot of the Tom Petty with the Heartbreakers album, Heaven Tonight by Cheap Trick, fantastic album. In May and June of 1991, the producer was Butch Vig. Now, after he had produced Nevermind, he went on to do L7's Bricks Are Heavy, which is actually a pretty underappreciated album from the 90s. Then he later did Siamese Dream by Smashing Pumpkins, which I think is kind of overrated myself. And, of course, he went on to become the drummer in Garbage.
Yeah, Garbage. Your girl...
Shirley Manson?
Shirley Manson from Edinburgh.
Yep. Yeah, a good red-headed lass, I tell you.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. The album was mixed by Andy Wallace, who, previous to doing Nevermind, he was the mixer on Electric by Cult. He did 3 Slayer albums. He did Rain and Blood, South of Heaven, and Season of the Abyss. And after he did it, he went on to mix such bands as System of a Down. And it's funny, you and I were talking about Toxicity, which just turned 20 years old yesterday at the time of this recording. Yeah. This album had 4 official singles: Smells Like Teen Spirit, Come As You Are, Lithium, and In Bloom.
Wow. Yeah, what a catalog, eh?
I know, right? And even, like, talking about Butch Vig, like, if you go back and look at some of the records he produced after Nevermind, it's like, holy God, like, this guy produced this record, he did this record, and Andy Wallace mixed this album. Like, that's amazing.
Totally amazing.
And it's funny because the record label DGC was really pushing other producers for Nirvana to do, but because they had worked with Butch Vig at his Smart studio in Madison, Wisconsin, because I think they did a couple of tracks that ended up on Nevermind. That's why they had a comfort level with him. And Andy Wallace, Cobain single-handedly picked him just because I think based solely on the fact that he did the Slayer records, if I'm not mistaken.
And there's no remixes for the Nevermind album, is there? It's not like, here, they mixed it and here you go.
Yep.
I don't think they went back and... I don't think there's a lot of double tracking in this album either.
There is quite a bit of double tracking on the record, especially if you listen to some of the songs like In Bloom or some of the deeper cuts in the album. You can definitely tell with how heavy and how big the vocals sound on it. But honestly, I mean, what can you say, man? There's just so many great things to say about those guys. But the funny thing is on the remastered version of the album, the one guitar, I don't know if it was a guitar mistake, but it was definitely a mistake when they recorded, that when you listen to the original release, it's clear as day, you can hear it. But on the remastered version, you can tell they cut that out and they spliced it all together. So
yeah, boo. I say boo. I was thinking of the Bleach album with the tracking production.
No, the production. No, Bleach. They definitely did not overdub a lot of it. But it's amazing. Like, Bleach as an album is one that a lot of people don't have, and I think it's. I don't think of it as a great album. I think of it as a very interesting perspective look at a band that later became what they were.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dissect.
Let's do it. So let's talk about the opening track. The first track that a lot of people heard from Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit. First thing you're going to recognize right away, the opening guitar riff. Single-handedly one of the most recognizable opening guitar riffs in rock music, bar none.
Right. And then the drums.
The drums, I mean, and that's a big thing you're gonna hear a lot when we're talking about these songs, is Dave Grohl's drum work on this track, and the entire album is so prevalent. And the big thing for me listening back to this album is just how fantastic they sound. And when, like I was talking about Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, Tom Petty, Heaven Tonight, even like you had REO Speedwagon, you had all these bands that produced their records and done their records at Sound City, that was always the big draw for these bands, was that they had their the big live room, and the drums just sounded amazing.
They did, yeah. They could accommodate the bands to produce something big like that, right? So when you have Studio A and Studio B that do two different functions, even Mick Fleetwood from Fleetwood Mac says, feels a bit guilty because of the Neve preamps and the thumping of the kick drum is just like, wow, and he kind of felt like he was leading the whole band based on this sound. So yeah,
and even if you watch the Sound City documentary, he says that was one of the big reasons they did a lot of their records there, just because of how great the drums sounded.
Wow, yeah, Smells Like Teen Spirit, good.
Such a fantastic song. I mean, that just the drum beat itself throughout that song, and it's funny because it's such a good one that if you listen to I'll Stick Around by the Foo Fighters, and it's a song that came off their first record, the beat itself just sounds like it's almost recycled off of it. It sounds so similar. And
right.
A lot of times I would say, okay, well, that's really lazy songwriting. But the thing is, one, that's Dave Grohl that just did that. But also, it's such a great beat that you can do it again, and it's still fantastic.
And once again, as a musician, he has a style. And anyone will tell you that anyone that has ever played one of Eddie Van Halen's guitars cannot reproduce his sound, because it comes from the feel, the tone comes from inside the person's body out, right? Whether it's your fingertips, whether it's just your groove, but when it comes to drumming, yeah, there's a lot of things that may seem recycled from previous bands or whatever, but it's that one drummer, and that's how he or she plays. Because there's a lot of very good female drummers out there also, so we can't discriminate. But
nope.
they have whenever you're drumming, it has to lend itself to the music, right? It's about serving the music, not the artist.
Yeah,
so.
Well, and it's funny, like, when we talk about Nevermind, especially with other side projects Dave Grohl has done as a drummer, whether it be Queens of the Stone Age or the first I think he did the first two Foo Fighter records on the drums, is that you can tell that Dave Grohl's attack and his precision is so spot on that he can do just about anything. But the fact is that his drumming on the album just lends so much to the songs. Like, he doesn't throw a lot of crazy drum fills in there. He doesn't go over the top or try to top Chris and Kurt. He just serves the song, and he does it beautifully.
Oh, he does. I mean, most singers will give you the stink eye if you're beating the crap out of cymbals when they're trying to sing, because the cymbals will be right in that quadrant of EQ where you don't either hear the singer or you miss what they're singing, or you just bleed them right out, And there's lots of drummers like Mickey D he's from many bands, but probably best known from Motorhead, who plays a certain style on certain ride cymbals that would actually bleed the singer out. But Lemmy says, yeah, no, just go on ahead and we'll push the vocals up front. Yeah. So, anyway, like you say, serving the song, that's definitely a Dave Grohl thing. And the drumming in Smells Like Teen Spirit, yeah, it gets 2 thumbs up in my books.
And it's funny, for as much praise as Dave Grohl definitely gets on the track and the album itself, one guy that I feel serves a big part of this is actually Chris Novoselic. Because going back to listening to this, his bass work on this tune, especially in the verses where Kurt only plays those 2 notes, really pushes it ahead, because he's now the main component to that song.
Rhythms, yeah, he's the rhythm section, just like Justin Chandler from Tool, where he takes over the whole rhythm section and carries the band sonically, right? And there was some pretty amazing bass lines that Chris Novoselic would do. So it's not just a matter of just playing the one note to carry the song through, right? So.
Mm-hmm. And even talking about, like, Kurt Cobain as such a presence on the song, and I think more on the vocals more than anything, just because of how it sounds. But one of the two really cool things about when with his guitar playing is that I really like how, especially how when the song builds and builds and builds into the chorus, it goes from like a clean tone and intro and verses, distorted in the chorus, but when he gets to the solo, and this is what I really found really cool the first time I heard the song, and then really resonated with me listening back to it, is Kurt ended up copying the vocal phrasing in the song for the solo, and that's the one thing that really because he could have just thrown something in really punky and frantic and something, but he did something that serves the song, and he does it in a tone that is so kind of futuristic sounding, because I think it's a not a phaser, it's like a chorus pedal I think he used on it, and it sounds really cool, and it's very prevalent in other songs in this record as well.
Absolutely, and that is a really, really good point where he would his vocal phrases would just reproduce what his lead guitar work was. So there was no shredding on these albums, right?
No.
Steve Vai did not appear courtesy of Columbia Records or somebody. So yeah, there's not a lot of shredding in grunge music. So when it comes to the lead parts, maybe he's a bit of a minimalist, but a lot of the fancy lead did not serve the song, so they went with something else, right? So
no, and I'm sure even looking at the 80s hair metal stuff, like a lot of the solos didn't serve anything other than just, oh look, here's a cool solo for you to hear.
You know, you listen to Mr. Beggars by Richie Kotzen, you know, as a member of a band, not as a solo artist. You can see this guy wants to break away from this band.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that's not the case with the grunge bands. They were cohesive. They were a group.
100%. Well, and even going back to what I was saying in this episode, like I was listening to the song during the summer, is that when I was working with the seasonal students this past summer, we were going out of Victoria, and one of them had the aux cord with their phone, and they put the song on. And it's amazing for a song that came out, 15 years before these guys were even born, and it still resonates with people. That's a sign of a true classic song right there, is the fact that it doesn't matter what age you are, it doesn't matter when you heard it, the fact that you hear it, it still resonates with you. Like, there's a lot of stuff from the 70s that I hear, and I'm like, that's really cool. Like, you hear a rock and roll hoochie coo, or you hear any of the Led Zeppelin stuff, or any of that kind of classic rock from the 70s, even stuff from the 80s. When you hear something that's so instantly classic like that, that's why it just stands the test of time. Yeah.
I think the decade of the 80s probably saw more changes in music in general, from the outro of punk to the intro of new wave and indie and techno, and then rock, and then fading out of rock going into grunge, right? Late 80s is grunge. So there was a lot of different changes of genre in the decade of the 80s. You know, outside of bands from Britain like The Fix and all these poppy, you know, the Bee Gees and all the rest of it, right? So
yep, The Cure.
Cure, prime example, son.
Yeah.
Cure. Anyway, we're getting off the tracks here again, so we're going to get back to the tracks.
Yep. And the next track we're going to talk about is the second song and another single off the album, In Bloom. And this is a song that... their song really is very dependent on the rhythm section, once again, with Chris and Dave, because while the main guitar riff is really, really solid, and I remember seeing a YouTube video, and I could not find it for the life of me, where it talks about how the guitar riff that Kurt plays is actually based on, I think it was either a jazz scale or a jazz pattern of playing, and I never really thought about that, because grunge doesn't really lend itself to jazz.
No. And yet he played a jazz master, right?
Yep.
Fender Jazz Master. So he didn't go for a Strat, didn't go for an old Bonnie Raitt 62 Strat, didn't go down to Emerald City and say, hey, Boone, can you hook me up with a...
Yep.
No, I want a Jazz Master. Right?
Yeah, I think he played a Jazz Master, but I also know he played Fender Jaguars too.
Pardon me, Jaguar.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of those guitars personally. I've played them.
I am not neither, but Barrick is. I just go, okay, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. Just the action's just really off for me. Maybe it's the ones that in the store that they have or whatever. But talking about the track, and one of the things that I think a lot of people who are very much into music production will really appreciate is just how much double tracking is on this record. And this is something that Butch Vig in the Classic Albums episode was talking about, is how he had to fight Kurt to double track, because Kurt didn't want to, and he always used the John Lennon reference of John Lennon would double track, and he would just go, all right, screw it, let's do it. And that's why if you listen to the vocals, it's not just Kurt himself doing 2 tracks, it's Kurt doing one, and then you have Dave over top of him. So you have the two, and it really sounds amazing.
Yeah. It's hard to get that into someone's head when you don't want it, because once again, they're paying to have the service of someone recording the music, and they will take control of the production, right? So, but it's also important for the person on the other side of the glass behind the faders to say, you know what, why don't we drop something in just underneath, rather than stacking the tracks, you can come underneath the tracks too, right?
Yeah.
So you can build the tracks up, or you can squash them back down, whatever you want to do, right?
Which was a lot easier nowadays doing it with, say, a Pro Tools or Audacity or whatever your program you're using. But these guys are using tape. So you have to nail this stuff. Yeah. This isn't like you can use Auto-Tune or Pitch Perfect or whatever kind of plugin you want. You need to nail this.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I run HD11 Pro Tools rig here at home, and not a huge fan of Auto-Tune. I know it's a flavor for the kids; they love it.
Yep.
But that would not have served anybody any good in this album whatsoever.
No, 100%.
I mean, you're going to be taking some of the dynamic feel out of it when you're snapping everything to the grid on Pro Tools. You're right. Tape is tape. Hit play. If you screw up. Okay. Yeah,
well, you're leaving it in, so. Yeah, but it's funny, and even talking about In Bloom, and earlier in this episode I was talking about how, when talking about Butch Vig when he was working in Smart Studios in Madison, Wisconsin, is that Nirvana did work on some of the songs that ended up on the album, and this is one of them. But the big thing about the song for me is, in the lyrics, he likes all our pretty songs, likes to sing along, likes to shoot his guns. It's actually in a reference to one of Kurt Cobain's friends, a gentleman by the name of Dylan Carson. I think he was in some Seattle bands as well. And from what I was reading about this, is that Kurt's autobiographer has said that it's referred to as a very thinly disguised portrait of the person.
Yeah, there's the band Death Cab for Cutie. I think they're from Seattle. There's still a lot of bands from Seattle that make references to Kurt Cobain, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but even bands that aren't from Seattle do it. Like Blink-182, in the next song we're going to talk about, they made a reference on the song Adam's Song. Now, talking about the next song, Come As You Are, this is one of the tracks that, quite honestly, if I was going to go back and listen to any of the songs off it, this is definitely one of them, because the whole song is very atmospheric. It has a real dark, haunting vibe to it. Even Kurt's vocal delivery of the song when he's singing, it almost sounds like he's reciting like a dark poem from Edgar Allan Poe, like The Raven or something like that, because that's kind of the vibe I get from it. But what I always found really cool about it is Kurt's very haunting guitar intro, where it's not arpeggioed, but I think it's like single played notes over a chorus pedal.
Yeah,
that's really cool, and that's such a distinct song, right? So
it is, and that song itself could easily serve itself in any movie that came out in the 90s.
100%. And
in The Crow or any of these movies, it's just like, and the kids would pick up on that. Oh yeah, that's Nirvana, eh?
Yeah, and it's such a distinct sound that 30 years after the fact, like if you play that, you're like, oh yeah, that's Nirvana. But you're absolutely right. It's a song that could have been used in movies, but the one media form of entertainment that it was used in is pro wrestling, because I think there was a wrestler that the whatever company he was with actually kind of ripped the song off. So that's kind of a cool thing for me to throw in there. But honestly, one of the big things for me in this song, Dad, do you ever listen to a song and you feel like you've been lied to?
Have you ever bought a CD or an album or a cassette where you thought, I think I just got the bum's rush. I think I just got ripped off here.
Yeah. I feel
Okay.
honestly really lied to in this song when Kurt says, "No, I don't have a gun," especially after he learned how he ended up dying.
Yeah, that's a bit of a twist, a bit of a play on them.
I hate when people do that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, there's a lot of things that led up to that particular day. I think that none of us will ever know, son. And
No.
I would just assume not, and just appreciate
Yep.
the gift of his music.
100%. And like we are talking about with Teen Spirit, the guitar solo really fits with this because it almost sounds like not like in Teen Spirit where he copies the vocal heart phrasing. He definitely sounds like he tried to do something very similar with that because when you hear the solo in it, it does sound like he's trying to do something very similar, like the vocal phrasing.
Right, especially playing off the root notes of the song, right? So, um, just like everything, when you start a phrase, it'll end up on the same note as you started with. In a nutshell, right? It's just like, okay, because you're trying to segue back. You're coming out of a bridge or in the song, or you're looking for a hook in the song, and that's one of the things I never found about Nirvana is there was no hook. There's nothing that just kind of, you know, there was nothing. There was not a vocal part or a guitar part or a drum part, or well, not a drum part, but there was no phrase in there as a hook that caught me, right? So, but that's not what grunge music was about. It's not hooky.
No, no, for sure. And while I do think that the songs off Nevermind do have quite a bit of hooks, but the thing is, the hook only works if it connects with you.
Yeah, of course, and it did connect with me. So,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So, yeah, come as you are. Yeah, everybody will remember that for a long, long time.
Yeah. Now, one track I don't think a lot of people will definitely remember, A, because it wasn't a single, but also because you would have to have the album itself to really appreciate, is the song Breed. And at first glance, Breed almost sounds like it's misplaced on this album. Excuse me. Just because with how the rest of the album sounds, where it is hard driving, but it has more of a poppy element to it, where this one has more of a hard driving punk sound to it, similar to how it sounded other bands sounded on Bleach. And going back to Dave Grohl, his drumming at the start of that song, that really pops when he just hits the snares as hard as he can, and it just then he hits the snare and then he just bursts into the opening drum beat. I listen to that and I think there's no way their original drummer would have been able to do that.
Right, because he did not have that dynamic feel as a drummer, right?
Nope.
He didn't have that intuition to go, okay, what am I going to do for this song that is going to take it to the next level, right? There's, there are drummers like Danny Carey from Tool. In their time signature, they know where they have to come around to bring the music back on. So when Danny or Dave Grohl, when they're doing their drumming, they know, okay, I'm gonna thump the crap out of these drums like they owe me money. But at some part of this song, really soon, I've got to bring the band back in so we can carry on with the singing, and which is the singing to me is always the most important part of this any song is the vocals, right? Because it's pretty much the canvas. It's going to be painting. It's the colors of the song, right? So.
Yeah, but even Dave's drumming on this song, and that's the one thing that I really appreciate, is that Dave is very, very dynamic as a drummer, but also I get a sense that Butch Vig didn't really restrain him in that. He's just like, okay, your crazy, frantic drumming is going to serve the song well. Go.
Yeah, that's right. And all Vig will be doing is going, okay, looks like you're clipping these tracks, man. I think I'm going to pull the faders back, but we still need to save the energy. And the energy would come from, well, partly from the preamps in that Neve console, and partly from the dynamic feel of the drumming at the time, because they knew in a recording studio, time is money. Your time is limited to when you get the studio, the time of day you get to use the studio. You know, you talked about Queensryche. Queensryche did Queen of the Reich at 3:30 in the morning. It's the only time they could afford studio time because they all flip burgers at Denny's and all this, right? So Nirvana, no, we've got to nail this. We've got money on it. We've rehearsed this, and we're going to do it. And yeah, they've done a really good job.
And like I was saying about Come As You Are, where this is definitely a song off the album that I go back to when I want to listen to Nirvana, breathes the exact same way. Because, and I think for me, as great of an album Nevermind is, I generally, and I know, and you'll know this firsthand, right? Like there's albums that you love, has great singles, but you always go back to more of the deeper cuts off the record. Because you're thinking, that's pretty cool, and while that wasn't a single, that's what really caught your attention.
You know, when it comes to music myself, I remember listening to Yes, I remember listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer. These are virtuoso bands. These are prog virtuoso groups. The band Chicago were all from the University of Chicago. They were very well trained musicians. Nirvana is not from Western Washington University.
Nope.
They are from
small town
of Seattle. You know, so that's when people criticize America's Got Talent and all these things. But the people, the young boys and girls on the show didn't cut their chops. They didn't pay their dues. Nirvana, I think Nirvana is one of the bands that have probably showcased, hey, we came from the ground up.
Yep, we cut our chops, man.
Yeah, we are a garage band. We're a garage grunge band, right? So, yeah, cool.
So moving on and talking about Lithium, another single off the record, and according to Butch Vig, and this is what I watched when I was rewatching the Sound City documentary, one of the things that I didn't actually ever know about this is that Dave Grohl, in the song when they were recording, he kept speeding up, and Dave, every take he kept doing this. So Butch Vig went to him and asked him, he says, Dave, have you ever played to a click track?
Yeah, that's right.
And he had to play to a click track for the entire song just to keep him in time.
No, that's right. I mean, especially when there's only three of you in the band, one's guitar and the other's a bass guitar. You know, you don't have any other percussions or any keyboard things that lend itself to bass or bass kept time. So click tracking, Neil Peart played to a click track even live. Okay, because at some point in-ear monitors will serve themselves very well, but you have to listen to yourself playing in time with your band.
Very much so. But I know even Neil Peart said years later that, you know, he played to a click track for so long that when they went off and did, what did they do? Some of their records in the early 90s where they were using live tracks and they weren't doing click tracks and these keyboards and whatever from the 80s. He says that's a hard habit to break out of because you're always trying to keep, you know, you hear it in your head, you're playing along to it, but that's not what it serves the song, right?
No, of course. Yeah. You know, even myself trying to record some of my own music, I have no reference other than, okay, I need a click track because I'm just doing guitar work.
Yep.
I don't have drums down. And now I'm playing the drums to a click track and going, okay, this is weird, but I'm not actually playing to the click track. I'm playing to the tempo. So if you can put down a drum loop that has a good tempo, yeah, that's a good reference start. So.
And a couple more things about this song. Obviously, like when I first heard Nevermind back in the day, it was one of my favorite songs off the album. I really like, and one of the big hallmarks for grunge or some of the alternative bands was that they always had that loud chorus, quiet verse. It was like quiet, loud, quiet sort of format. It really serves great in this song just because, honestly, I think it really makes the chorus pop, in my personal opinion. And there's
it allows the other musicians to come through, especially when you're listening to "Smells Like Teen Spirit."
Yep.
And especially when you're watching the video for "Smells Like Teen Spirit" and the young kids in the gym, and then the cheerleaders are shaking the pom poms when they're doing the soft core stuff, but the drums and the bass are still coming through, and you can feel the anticipated build up to what's coming. And yeah, so and that's just really good songwriting, in my personal opinion. Yeah, your captured audience has to be captured and retained, not just going, oh man, is that it? Okay, see ya. Here's the peace sign, and then you leave. So
yeah, and it's very easy to do that, right? Especially with a sound that is pretty minimal, like what Nirvana had, where it could have been easy after a few tracks just to turn it off because it's like, oh, it's just the same stuff over and over and over again. But the thing is that Nirvana makes it interesting, they make it fresh, and you were saying about how using that quiet, loud, quiet format in songs like "Smells Like Teen Spirit," where you really emphasize on the other members. Chris Novoselic's bass work in the verses, again, that's another track where you listen to it and you're like, this guy was a really underrated bass player, and a lot of people don't ever mention him.
yeah, and when I was talking about how you're going to build up the suspense in this song, I think Adam Jones from the rock band Tool is probably the single best at it. Like where he uses feedback, and it starts right through the vocals, and then when the vocals end, so does the feedback, and it supports the sonic overall feel of this, because it's just getting louder. It's the suspense thing, like watching a scary movie, right?
Yep.
And they got violins and all kinds of weird instruments going on, and then it gets loud. So, and that's what I liked about Nirvana. Nirvana had a feel for that. Kurt Cobain had a feel for that, and the rest of the band followed suit. They all had a general feel for how they're going to bring this song through. So, yeah, that's cool.
Now, moving on to Polly. Now, Polly is a track that, honestly, if this was a vinyl album, this would have been the perfect bookmark for side A, because it's just a slower track. Really, there's not a ton to really talk about the song, because it's just in a Kurt playing and a cymbal. That's really all that's even in this song. And this is the only song on the album Dave Grohl's not even featured on, because when they recorded it, the original drummer was the one that hit the cymbal. And yet, even though he's uncredited.
And I think some of the kids, or some of the people in general, listening to this album, and people such as myself, would look and listen and go, this is just a filler for this album.
Yep.
I feel like I just got ripped off, man. Anybody who ever bought the album Machine Head by Deep Purple knows every track on that album is equally good as Smoke on the Water. Like, that was money well spent.
Yep.
It's just like, wow. I know you're not a huge Cars fan, but the Cars debut album, everything was so good on that album. It's just like, damn, this is so good. And that was back in the time when Van Halen 1 came out. And people are just going, wow, this is insane. So anyway, just talking about albums that feel like, yeah, you just got ripped off, man. I want my money back. There's only one good song on this whole album, and I could have bought it as a single.
Yeah, and that was a problem back in the day, was that, you'd buy an album for whatever it was, $15 or whatever it was back in the day. You go for only maybe one or two songs that you'll like, and now you're stuck with it for the rest of the time.
And if the song Smells Like Teen Spirit is worth $15, then I say go ahead and buy that album, man.
Yeah, but there's always the flip side of it, is that was it worth more just to buy it as a single instead of the whole album?
Right. And then would the single be released in the same, well, not the same format? Would it would it be the radio single or would it be the album single, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to be 3 minutes less a couple seconds? Every CCR song, other than listen to Suzy Q and Born in the Bayou and everything, they were all songs for the radio, for AM radio. They were under 3 minutes, and it was all about getting, Ivory liquid detergent soap commercials or something like that.
Yep.
It had nothing to do with music, right? So
100%. So, like I said, I mean, Polly, it's definitely the one track in the album that I always skip over, just because, again, it's and there's nothing wrong with the song. I'm trying not to make it sound like it's a terrible song, but it's definitely a song where it's just a little too slow for my liking. And you're absolutely right; it would be just a filler track for most people would look at it that way. Honestly, and the story behind it of how Kurt heard about the story of how the song's about is about a girl who got kidnapped after a punk show, and she ended up getting away. The story behind it is a lot more interesting than the song itself, but honestly, I'm not going to go too much into detail about it. So going into the next track, Territorial Pissings, and when I was talking about Breed, how it sounds almost kind of out of place on the album,
yeah.
This is the song. You want to talk about a song that sounds so out of left field, especially with how it sounds? This is it right here, because this one just comes out of left field with how hard driving and punky it is, and especially with the more pop-driven songs on the record, this is easily still one of my favorite deep cuts off the album. The only thing I think about when I hear this song, Kirk just screams the whole way through. I can't even imagine being in the studio when he was recording, especially in the last 11 seconds, where he just looks like he's just losing his mind. Yeah. I would honestly look at it and be like, what was he doing?
Yeah. Anybody that sits behind the glass and behind faders, loading tracks from the musicians and looking at all the facial expressions and everything, they probably just go, wow, what's up with this cat,
Yeah.
Like sometimes people perform in the studio like they're performing live because you're trying to catch the inspiration, which is perfect. Yeah, but you're right, that screaming there, man, I think he blew his voice out.
I couldn't even imagine, just in the last 11 seconds. And the thing about the song itself, Dad, is that when I hear Kurt doing that, it doesn't sound out of place. He just sounds like he's really just giving it his all, and by the final 10 seconds of the song, he's got nothing left, and he's just trying so hard to push through. And it's funny, and this is something I haven't talked about at all, is that the one thing that really resonates with me when talking about Kurt, especially on any of the records he does, he never sounds like he's phoning it in. He always sounds like he's putting his heart and soul into it. And I think that's why so many people have always appreciated Kurt, is because there was nothing phony about him.
Yeah, definitely not. There was nothing plastic about both his guitar playing and his singing. A lot of people have criticized both of those things. They say, he couldn't carry a tune in a Home Depot pail. But that was my plug by Home Depot, by the way.
Yep, future retirement plans.
But, just because Eddie Van Halen was a repping guitar player, I don't think we should be picking and choosing the top 10 guitar players. I think what we should look at is, who are your top favorite? What is your top favorite album, son? And you would say, one of them, Dad, is Nirvana. And I'd go, tell me more. And, where I'd pull out, Bowie and T-Rex.
Yeah.
And I would fill up my top 10 long before I even got into the 70s, right? But the whole thing is Kurt Cobain gave his all, and I think a lot of people, including the producers of the albums and the recording engineers and the mastering engineers, listen to this going, wow, this guy is giving it up for this song. This guy is the real deal, man.
Yeah. And like I said, Territorial Pissings, I mean, when I first heard that song, I was just really beside myself because, again, when I think of Nevermind, I think of the more pop-driven songs, but when I hear it, it's like, what did I just listen to? What is that? It's kind of like if somebody was to hear, you hear all these cool metal bands, and you hear something like Ministry, or you hear some of the really crazy like death metal bands or Norwegian black metal, and you're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
It's just so over the top.
Yeah. When I first heard Queensryche, what sold me on Queensryche was your buddy there, the lead singer there.
Was it Jeff Tate?
Yeah, Jeff Tate. Sorry, brain freeze there for a minute. His vocal range was very, very, very good, but his lyrical writing, like, there's that one song there where he sings, "See the years through the tears in her eyes."
Just Any Woman.
Yeah.
Great song.
And a buddy of mine goes, "Well, what the hell is Jet City?" I said, "Buddy, these guys are from Tacoma. Where do you think friggin' SeaTac Airport is?"
Yeah.
Oh, man. And,
Look at Boeing.
You just couldn't reference that. I go,
yeah, you also got, you got like SeaTac out of Tacoma, but you also have the fact that Boeing was making airplanes in Seattle.
Of course, yeah. So,
I mean, why do you think their basketball team was called the Supersonics? Because it was made after the supersonic jet that didn't end up coming to be.
No, it did not come into fruition. So, anyway, back to your track list, my boy.
So the next song, and when talking about Nevermind, I will go on record and say this is probably my favorite song by Nirvana, "Drain You."
Oh,
it's a
is
song
that number 8. Is that what it was?
Sorry?
Is number 8 on the album?
I believe so. Yeah, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, "Drain You" is such a, to me, and it's weird because it's a song that I like so much, but yet I can't fully describe why that is. Because if you were to play Teen Spirit or In Bloom or some of the radio singers, you can 100% you can explain to somebody why that is. Like, why is it that you like this song so much? "Drain You" is just such a good song because, well, number one, again, it's Dave Grohl. I mean, what more can you say at that point, right? His drum fills transitioning from the chorus into the verses is so awesome. But the thing that, and I was talking about this earlier, on the remastered version of this album, it fixed a very noticeable edit. And it was about 32 seconds into the song, right as Kurt starts going into the chorus, where if you listen to the CD version of it, it sounds like, if say you're using Pro Tools, right? You're recording a track, you make a flub, but you keep going, like you make a flub, but you keep going afterwards. Now, it may sound natural if you keep the flub in, cut the flub out, and like, you put the two tracks together. It sounds like you've edited it. That's what it sounded like. And that's one of the things I really noticed on it when I re-listened to the remaster, was like, that's not in it anymore.
And when you have a mistake or something like that, especially in a Pro Tools rig, you have to put in crossfaders. Short crossfaders will dynamically take the song and keep the smoothness in it, not the choppiness, right? Not making it sound very medicinal, right? Not that I'm like some Pro Tools expert. I'm just saying that's how it's done. They could have ducked that part too, where they could have layered something on top of it, where it would have squashed it down and ducked it out, where you could barely even hear it, but it was still there, right?
Yeah, so. And they were doing this at a time, again, without Pro Tools or Pro Logic or whatever. Yes, it was the 8th track off the album, by the way. But yeah, like I said, I will go on record and say it was one of my favorite songs from Nirvana. I can't properly describe what it is, but every time I hear it, I always listen to it the whole way through, and I always get the same sense of enjoyment out of it.
Good.
So that's what it's about for me.
That's what's important, right? You get, like when you listen to something, you go, "Oh, I don't dig this anymore," right? It's just like, "Oh, okay, whatever." Or you're listening to a song and you're waiting for a particular part of the song because you know it's coming up, and you go, "Okay." And if you want to air guitar it or whatever it is, whatever you do, yeah. But, yeah. Anyway, no, track number 8, right on.
So moving on to the 9th song on this album, "Lounge Act."
Right.
Now this is honestly, this is a song that, it's a good song.
Mm-hmm.
there's
Does it
not
fit the album?
it does fit the album, but there's just nothing about this that I can really say about it. Like the rhythm section really pushes the song. Novoselic's bass work, and I think Rick Beato, I think he talked about his top 20 bass players of the 90s or whatever, and he put Chris Novoselic's opening bass line of this in it, and he talked about how he's such an underrated bass player.
Yeah,
And
I have to watch that because I'm a huge fan of Rick Beato.
I'll have to send it to you later on today.
Oh, okay, great.
But I think the big thing for me in this is I really love how, and we were talking about how it builds and builds and builds the suspense, and it just comes alive. This is another track that does that because it's kind of just not flat, but it just kind of goes along, but then it builds and builds and builds. And it builds right up until Kurt just comes alive and Dave Grohl is really unleashed at about, I think, a minute 48 into the song. And it's easily one of my favorite drum beats he's ever done.
Yeah.
So it's such a cool thing. But the song, honestly, it's like 2.5 minutes. There's nothing filler about it.
Right.
It's a solid track.
I think Nirvana, I think the players in Nirvana feed off each other. They complement each other, but they feed off each other. It's just like, okay, you know, like where you listen to older music like the Beatles, it's very orchestrated. It's like we're going to build it this way, and I don't think John Lennon tried to outdo Paul McCartney in a certain vocal chain or something. But I think the drumming of Dave Grohl probably got Kurt Cobain excited. Going, okay, I'm going to start playing really hardcore here. So.
Yeah. Well, definitely, because Nirvana was definitely a band that I always think about this in music, is that there are certain bands out there that individually they may not be the best musicians in the world, but when you put all of them together, it's amazing what you get out of them together.
Collectively, yeah.
Nirvana is a prime example of that.
Yeah, not as a solo artist, right? I mean, I did enjoy the Jerry Cantrell solo work, but it was not the same as Lane Staley and him singing together. Because when it comes to music, myself personally, I'm a huge fan of harmony. That's why I'm a huge fan of the Everly Brothers, because of harmony. And I think some of the greatest harmony in rock and roll history will be Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell.
Yep.
So where am I going with that? I'm just saying the difference between Cantrell as a solo artist versus collectively as a band. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, with Kenny and the rest of the boys in the Chains. And that's one thing I missed about Nirvana. Is it was I didn't hear a lot of double tracks or triple tracks or tracks stacking on the vocals. But once again, it has to lend itself to this song. So
now the song "Stay Away," which came after Lounge Act on this album, one of the things I really came to appreciate years later re-listening to this is that when you think of bands, especially the Southern California punk bands in the 90s, like the Pennywises, the Offspring, bands like that came out of, say, the Bay, or they came out of Anaheim, is that they have a very distinct skater sound to them. And I think for me, the opening drums and the bass really have that kind of SoCal punk vibe to them, even though bands like Pennywise and the Offspring weren't famous yet, which I think is pretty cool. But I think for me, this is yet another standout deep cut on the album. It really works as a punk song. The rhythm section, again, is fantastic. And I could go on for days and days about Grohl and Novoselic. But for me, it's Kurt. Kurt really does a great job in this with his playing and his singing because, and I've talked about it on Territory Pissings, where his screaming sounds natural. It doesn't sound like he's forcing it. And that's what's really, really cool about that song.
No, I have to agree. I totally agree on that one. That was certainly a very good individual effort. I've said a million times, when it comes to singing, when it comes to vocals, it can never be too loud in the track. If you're a good singer, and I know I keep referencing Tool in your show here, son.
Yep.
But I'm hard-pressed to find a vocalist right now that holds my attention more than Maynard James Keenan.
And it's funny because if you listen to Tool, what's the one thing you notice is that his vocals are never mixed up high. It's always the band's mixed high and he's mixed back.
And even in his physical position live,
Yep.
that's his physical position he takes. He doesn't want to be in the spotlight.
Yeah, because even when we saw them live, and we saw them live twice, he was always in the back in the shadows.
Sometimes, there'd be no lights on him at all. It's just like, wait a minute, what happened to Maynard? Maynard's not interested in being the point of reference in the band.
Mm-hmm. Which is funny when you look at some of his solo projects where, like, you look at A Perfect Circle, you look at Pussifer. He's definitely more the vocal point of those bands, and he's more the face of it.
Yeah,
but I think he's very conflicted on that sort of attention towards him, though.
And there's the opposite side of that whole coin. When you have a person like Maynard, and then you have a band you put together, and I'm going to use the Bon Jovi reference. Phil X is a hard gun for Bon Jovi. And when they played Wembley Stadium, Phil X, all he could do to stop himself from running up front, grabbing the microphone and saying, "Hey, Wembley, how you doing?" You do not do that when the front man is Bon Jovi. That will end your career quickly.
Yep.
If you bust off and start shredding and doing your own thing when Taylor Swift is trying to sing, you're not going to be in her band.
Nope.
You're going to be out of work, and no one's going to hire you. You may be lucky to hit a couple of studios, but that's it.
Yeah, it's not like you're playing with, say, Alice Cooper or Rob Zombie or something where it does land to the music, right?
Yeah, and those two that you just mentioned would encourage the band to come up forward and say, "Okay, let's all. Now's your time to shine," right? So, But with Kurt Cobain, I think he shined all the time for the band, right?
100%. And when it comes to the song "Stay Away," I can 100% believe that Nirvana could close a show with this. It's such a high energy, fast track, but also near the end of the song where the bass and drums just get really crazy and frantic, and it just sounds like it's just tumbling onto each other.
Yeah.
A lot of people would see that as really sloppy, but I think it fits the song because it's, again, it's such a fast track and then it just crumbles at the end, and that's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you ended your show that had that level of music going on all night, then you ended up ending your show playing, say "Let It Be" or something by the Beatles, you would crash and burn all at the same time. That's not the grunge way. That's not the Nirvana way. They left everyone wanting to come back.
Yep.
Okay, we'll be back next week, cats. We've got to go to Tacoma tonight. We're playing at the Paramount here. We're going to be back in town next week, without even telling them. And they left the audience wanting more, and that's important. It's a gigging band. They were a gigging band. They were a hard-working band.
Yeah, and they toured everywhere, man. Like, again, they toured Vancouver Island tons. Like, they came up here, Alice in Chains came up here, Pearl Jam came up here, like, all the Seattle bands came up here, so it wasn't like they were only isolated to the one city.
Yeah, Dave Grohl said they rented a van one time or something. They were somewhere in Montreal, and they were freezing. They nearly froze to death. It was so cold. And these are some of the things as musicians that you have to endure when you're coming through.
Yep.
Paying your dues.
Yeah, because when you pay your dues, that's the stuff that you're going to remember when you make it big.
Yes, you will. Yeah, that way you won't forget. It's a good reality check.
Yep.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next track, "On a Plane." And again, it's another fantastic track off the record. There's nothing too crazy or groundbreaking about it. It's just a solid rock track to it. I think for me, I actually kind of forgot how cool. Kurt has backing vocals where he's singing it, but he goes ooh. He kind of does like this ooh thing, and it's very haunting. It almost sounds like it would have sounded on like "Come As You Are" or one of these kind of tracks. But when song fades into it, it doesn't add much. But there's something kind of interesting about it for me. I can't explain what it is. Like when I hear it, I'm like, even though it doesn't add anything, it's very memorable, and you always remember that.
Right. And the mix engineer listening to that will let the band know whether it fits or not. And that was one of Tool's, once again, my reference to Tool, doing Undertow when they had Sylvia Massey recording. Sylvia Massey is incredible. And she would say, I don't know if that's going to fit, but why don't we try this? And she would take the crappiest microphone from Radio Shack and say, sing into this for a second and just see what kind of crap sound we can get. Because when you record that, everybody that records music is going, how did they do that? What's this magical piece of equipment? What is this microphone from the 50s from Germany that costs $58,000 today?
Yeah.
No, that's not it. And she came up with an idea for sub kicks to use a speaker in the kick drum. She's not the innovator of it, of course. I think Roland will take full credit for that.
Yeah.
But these are the sorts of things that the people behind the desk recording will say, listen, why don't you try that? And then leave the audience going, wow. You don't have to reproduce it live, not for any love or money. And people aren't expecting all the studio gravy in that stew when they're looking at it, right? But what they will do is go, man, that's very, very cool. I wish I knew what that was.
Yeah. Well, I know. Well, what's funny is Pearl Jam on their album By Nero, they did something not similar, but they did something where the producer of the album, basically, it was this, not a term, but it was like a way of recording where you had the band playing, you put the mic in, say, a mannequin, like a hollowed out mannequin's head, and you get the sound to bounce off the mannequin head into the mic. And it sounds like you're right there.
What you're talking about, son, references When the Levee Breaks. The most talked about drum beat still today ever. And Andy, or John Glynn's, or Andy Johns, pardon me, said he sent all the people down to the pub, except for you, John. John Bonham, we're going to try something, right?
Yep.
And that is where the recording engineer, he or she becomes the next member of the band. And that's what you're paying for. You're paying for them to be part of the production. Rick Beato will tell you this. You are paying for a service. Be part of it, or get the hell out of it, man.
Yep.
Don't rely on the mixing house or mastering house to make this better, because garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
That is what every recording studio will tell you. I cannot make you sound like Nana Muscuri when you sound like shite.
100%.
Right? So, yeah. Sorry, I took away some of your shine out of that.
No, that's fantastic. No, honestly, like I said, there's just, that's kind of the thing with some of these songs is that when you hear them, they're good, but there's just not a ton you could really say about it. It's just like, yeah, it's cool. Then you move on, right?
Yes.
Now, we're going to move on and talk about the final track on this album, not including the hidden track, which I completely forgot about.
Yeah.
So maybe maybe in the editing, maybe I'll talk about that later on.
Okay. All right.
But talking about the final track, Something in the Way. This is a song where
this is the last track, the 13th track.
100%. Yep, this is be the final track on the album. This right here, the legend of this song and the story behind the song, to me is almost as interesting as the song itself, because the song was allegedly about Kurt living under a bridge, the Yonge Street Bridge in Aberdeen, which has been proven to not be true because of how muddy the banks were, and that's how Nirvana got the name for one of their live albums years later, from the muddy banks of the Wishaw River, whatever the hell it was called. But you really get the sense, for me, just from the vibe and sonically, it's a track that pushes this feeling of isolation. And it's such a cool track, and even when they did it unplugged, you still get that feeling too.
there's a Tool song on the Undertow album where Maynard makes reference to the silk of the undertow from the silk of the bank on a bridge, and I believe it references this one in Aberdeen, and not the Aberdeen in Scotland, but the one
Nope.
in the state of Western Washington. Like, and yeah, it's kind of interesting how bands can borrow things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jimmy Page said, "Good musicians borrow, great musicians steal." Right, steal ideas.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, this is a track that's always caught my attention. It's always something that I was very fascinated reading about, and even years after the fact. Again, going back to what I was talking about with the Sound City documentary and the Classic Albums episode, like Butch Vig was talking about how the band tried to record this song live in the room together with no success. So after like a couple of takes, Kurt came into the control room. He sat on the couch with an out-of-tune 5-string guitar, and he proceeded to show Butch how it's supposed to sound. Butch heard that and says, "Okay, stop." He went, turned off the fans, unplugged the phone, turned anything off that's going to make noise. He says, "Okay, I'm going to hit record. Go." He hit record, and that's what came out, was what you heard on the record.
One take, eh?
Yep.
Wow, that's, yeah.
And it's interesting because it's a song that, again, like I said, it's an out-of-tune guitar. So the other guys in the band are trying to play to this, and they found it really difficult because it's like, how do we even play to this? Like, how do we tune our instruments to this? And they talk.
Their music was a semi-note below drop D, and so I think for some unknown reason they said, "Okay, why don't we tune it back up to D?"
Yeah, I think their first album was like that. I think for this one it was all in standard, if I'm not mistaken. I think some of the tracks on it were done in other tunings. Yeah, but
standard tuning. Yeah, because I know they weren't big in alternate tuning, which I think they would have been really good at. But for the most part, I think most of the music in the '90s was drop D.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, the tuning itself should be to support the lead vocal, especially if they blow their voice out, right?
Yeah. And
they've still got 10 shows to do in North America leg or something, and it's just like, okay, I'm not going to be doing any Rob Halford stuff or anything like that tonight, you know? Maybe we should drop her down a little bit, boys. Jimi Hendrix was a horrible singer, right?
Oh, 100%, man. There was nothing good about him as a vocalist.
Not at all. You know, he really was not. And personally, I don't even think Neil Young was a good singer, but many people would correct me on that. So.
Well, I'm not.
But what was double drop C or something? Jimi Hendrix's tuning. It was like really bizarre.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
But like I said, I always found.
Sorry, son. You were going to talk about.
No, sorry. No, I was interrupting you. Go ahead.
No. I was. There are many albums out there, bands, including System of a Down,
mm-hmm.
where the CD keeps playing and then a little song interlude comes on. You go, oh, whoa,
yep.
Wait a minute. Where you would have just pulled the CD out and put in something else at that point, right?
Yeah.
And then you go, hey, wait a minute, I've never heard that before. Yeah, it's on, whatever. You steal this album or something, whatever the old stuff from System of a Down is. But once again, look at the boy behind the faders, doing the mixing, doing the what's his name? Your buddy there.
Butch?
Not Butch Vig. Oh, was it Butch Vig that did that?
No. Oh, you're talking the System of a Down records. No, that was Rick Rubin.
Yeah, Rick Rubin. Yeah. So he's a bit of a genius in his own mind when it comes to recording.
Yeah, but I mean, but the bands and albums that he's recorded, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, but once again, it's really incumbent upon the person recording the music to pull the best out of the musicians, saying, you know what, that was a great take there, Kurt Cobain. Do it again.
Yep.
Because for two reasons. One, you can either dump the track or you can layer the track. You know, you're either dumping the tracks or stacking them or coming underneath. So, what do they say about Prince? There's enough music that Prince hasn't put out yet to keep us going for another 40 years or something?
Yeah, I think from what I had actually heard, there's at least 40 full music videos, and not just like he was playing a concert and they had live footage. It was like fully paid for, costumes, everything, sets. Nobody's ever seen it. And now with Prince passing away, you're getting all the vault stuff. But sorry, going back to what I was saying here about something in the way for a second, and we're talking about the recording of it, was that in the Sound City documentary, and we're talking about Pro Tools, is that the band actually had to get a very early version of Pro Tools. Funny enough, that's what Chris Novoselic called it. He called it Slow Tools. In order to properly line the song up, because Butch Vig has gone on record saying that he would have had to done a lot of crazy edits with the tape to fit it all together. And the one cool thing also, and one of the nice things about them using Pro Tools is that the cello that they use, which really adds to it.
Is it though?
It's so perfect, and even the guy who played the cello said to Butch, he's like, "How do I tune this to this song?" Like,
yeah, and even with Pro Tools, when you're playing something, you have the ability to slow the tape line down, which would drop the tone, whether it's a semitone or a complete step down, or you can speed it up. But back then, you didn't have that with Pro Tools. This is something later that Pro Tools developed. So when you were making, you were talking about, Chris Novoselic talking about Pro Tools. The early version of Pro Tools was so archaic.
Yep.
It was just like, why would someone even come up with this?
You hit render and it took like 2 hours to do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, today you can bounce in real time. You know, so the rendering for Pro Tools and the rendering for, even for doing your podcast here, right?
Yep.
I mean, just the way Mac has it set up for rendering music is incredible, because that time is money, right?
Yep.
And if the band wants to hear that track back and go, no, can we dump it? Can we do it again? And everybody will be looking at their wristwatch and going, it's 1:45 in the morning, and we're getting kicked out at 3 because Queen's Reich are coming in to use the studio.
Yeah.
Because that's all they can afford. So, yeah.
Yeah. But when talking about the cello, and it really does add to the dark atmosphere that they're doing for the song. You know what it really reminded me of? If you've ever heard Good Riddance by Green Day, it sounds exactly like the violin in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's another thing where Rob Cavallo, who was I think he was the producer, I think he was also their manager too for Green Day, he told the guys, because they couldn't nail it, he says, okay, it's just, songs is okay, I guess. It's not really, there's something missing. He sent them out in the lobby, says, go play ping pong or whatever the hell you want to do for 20 minutes and come back. And when he came back, he laid that violin part in one take. Says, there you go.
That's amazing.
Yep.
That's good. That's excellent.
Yeah. So the one final comment I got to make, and it's funny because for an album that's 30 years old, Something in the Way actually charted on the Billboard charts in August of last year.
Oh.
It was on an official soundtrack for an animated Batman movie that brought the song back to relevance, and so it got back on the Billboard charts.
That's wild. That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of neat how there's a new youthfulness put back into the Nirvana album. And Resurgence, or whatever they call it.
The Resurgence, yeah.
Yeah. Just based on a commercial or something. Like, I know most commercials about selling cars to people my age would be, Rebel Rebel by Bowie or something. That would capture my attention.
Yep.
Something from Nevermind, I'd go, okay, no, I don't think I need a new Corvette.
No, but that's the thing. Like people like my age, because I'm almost as old as this album is. But even like younger kids who are discovering Nirvana today or listening to grunge, they have a whole new perspective on it. Because, like, say, people in 1991, when they were first hearing this stuff, it was fresh, it was new, it was exciting. Now, 30 years after the fact, the younger kids are hearing about these bands that, oh yeah, these guys were so revolutionary, and these were... All they have is basically like word of mouth. So they're going in with a brand new mindset in 2021. You're having that 2021 mindset of listening to a record that's 3 decades old.
Rather than regurgitating what someone said back in the day.
Yep.
You know? I mean, you're absolutely right. The whole approach to listening to music from people such as myself, there's music for everybody, right? And that's what's really, really good. And if the song is done right, it's good. So with the young people, younger than yourself, listening to the music that you listen to, it's almost like telling your son, you know, when I was your age, we used to listen to Smells Like Teen Spirit.
When I was your age and I heard things on a compact disc instead of your fancy Spotify.
Yeah, you know, and back in the day when I had an 8-track and people are going, what is 8-track? So,
yeah.
I was very fortunate to be your age when that came out.
Yep.
So I was listening to it for the first time at your age, going, yeah, this is cool. And once again, it's from this whole circus of excitement from Seattle. And then people would say, oh, have you heard this band? Have you heard this band? How about this other one? I go, okay, where does it end? Well, this is cool, man.
Doesn't, yeah. But even, like, for myself, is that discovering these bands on my own some 10, 15 years after these records had already come out and their time in the spotlight, or the mainstream spotlight, had really faded. And now I have a fresh new perspective on these bands that I heard. But one thing I always thought was really cool was your reaction to when I started getting into these bands. Was that, I always wanted to know that for yourself. Like, was that a thing that you got yourself back into those kind of bands when I started getting into them years later?
Well, I'll tell you something about grunge music. If it had come out when I was a kid in high school, I would have been balls deep in it. I would have thought, this is great. Because I think, not to diminish the musicianship, but I think as a musician, as a kid, you struggle hard to learn how to play that so you can play it for your friends on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I don't think there's any over-the-top, even the drumming, I don't think there's any over-the-top guitar work, both bass and lead guitar work, where an average guitar player kid in high school, such as Ian McDonald, who played in our band, would have not figured that out in one night. You know? So I'm thinking to myself, good, now we can play all this music and we can play it live because it's the now music, it's what's fresh, it's what's... And then all of a sudden we hit the stage and we start doing Smells Like Teen Spirit. We become as big as Nirvana itself because now our friends are identifying with us. Kurt Cobain's friends identified with him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's, you know, I most certainly am not going to reference Jerry Cantrell's guitar work because it is very, very complex.
Yep.
It is big. There is guitar work in the song Wood that was in the soundtrack for Singles. That is a very, very difficult song to play. So I'm just trying to make a reference. If I was a kid listening to this for the first time, it's no different than me listening to Johnny Rotten, Paul Jones, and everyone yelling anarchy for the UK, and Nevermind the Bollocks.
Yep.
God Save the Queen, although it was supposed to be the big hit off that album, was not the big hit.
No.
It's not what the kids related to because not all the kids in England that wanted to be punkers wanted to slag the British family.
No.
The royal family, pardon me. So they left that alone and they went after anarchy in the UK about the government and they went on to all the other songs, Holidays in the Sun, you know, and that was the Nirvana of my time. That was the anti-establishment movement. that was, I'm going to give it to the man. I'm going to, do my own thing. Very short-lived, just like grunge.
Yep.
Very short-lived. But relevant nevertheless, right?
100%, man. 100%. Well, I guess that wraps up the final track here on Nevermind. So I guess the only thing we can really give here is our final thoughts on the album. And again, coming into this album, I always, like, before the album, I still said, yeah, this is a 10 out of 10 record and all this stuff. I'm still going to maintain this is still a 10 out of 10 record. It's still an amazing record after all this time. The instrumentation is still great. Everything about it still holds up. And really, the best term I could use is it stood the test of time.
That it most certainly has. As you know, I'm scoring it low still because I'm going to follow the course that I started.
Yep.
But that is not to diminish anything. Once again, that the personality and the person himself, Kurt Cobain, what he did for the people, I give him 11 out of 10.
Yep.
And this whole BS with Buddy trying to sue his estate and Courtney Love and all the band members because his junk was hanging out on the album. I say, you know what, Buddy? I think you cashed in. It's time to you to F off.
Yep.
And let it go. Because he wants this kid, or whatever he is, he wants 150 large US. What are you buying? What was it that you wanted to buy? Are you looking to get a new Corvette? Either go big or get the hell out. And he's trying to build a case about child pornography and stuff and that.
It's such a thin argument because honestly, if he had such a problem with it, he would have never recreated the album. How many times over since then? Like even 10 years ago, I can't remember, some magazine, or it might have been Rolling Stone magazine or whoever. He recreated it.
Yeah, and the whole thing is he already cashed in on this.
Yep.
So you've made your money. It's time to stop exploiting this now, or trying to go back after the band for this. This is a dead issue, I don't remember the guy, but Hunter, what the hell's his name? He used to be the publisher for Rolling Stone magazine.
Oh, Hunter S. Thompson.
Yes, Hunter S. Thompson. I was getting him confused with L.J. Hubbard,
Ron Hubbard.
Anyway, he would phone this guy up personally and say, you know what, buddy, you've made your money, now F off. He would have done the Howard Stern approach. He would have said, okay, leave it alone, man. Okay, you're not advocating for child pornography against it. You're not. I don't know what the hell to say about it. I just find it a bit disappointing, and I hope if he does get $150,000, 90% of that will go to this law firm supporting him.
Yep.
Maybe he can get his Nevermind tattoo on his chest taken off with the rest of the money.
No, maybe.
He cashed in on that too.
Well, Dad, I'll tell you, even though I know you're disappointed with this guy trying to cash in 30 years later, one thing that isn't a disappointment has been your debut appearance on the show. I can't thank you enough for doing this. Now, I got to ask, before we close this off, there's so many bands that we've referenced, from Tool, Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains. If, in the future, if there's going to be episodes on any of those bands' albums, will you come back?
100%. If you do something on Undertow,
yep,
by Tool, they're technically their second album release, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is so much backstory to that album, including the lovely Sylvia Massey, and there's just so much to talk about that in terms of the approach to the album. And then the fact that they did not choose to use her again on their third album.
Yep. Yeah, because I can't remember who they got for that. They might have got the guy for King Crimson, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, like I said, there's so many albums that I can review, and I'm really looking forward to do them. So, again, I can't thank you enough for doing that.
My pleasure, son. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. This is great.
This is awesome, man. This is a fun time.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you do choose to do Undertow, I am all in, son.
Excellent.
And this time I'll do it for free.
Oh, well, spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Jeez.
Yeah, my people are going to be sending you something in the mail.
Well, that's good because I've changed my address. So.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah. Well, guys,
son,
I can't.
Have yourself a great night, son.
You too, Pop.
All right, buddy. And you know I love you, crazy man. And I'm glad that you and both me and the rest of Seattle and the world benefited from the music and will continue to benefit from the music of Kurt Cobain and the rest of the cast member of Nirvana.
Absolutely. Well, guys, that wraps up this edition of the Gr8Wyte Experience. I hope you've enjoyed it because, believe me, we definitely loved doing it for you today. You can find us on Twitter at Gr8Wyte as well. You can find us on YouTube at Gr8Wyte Experience. For my dad, Kenny Gibson, I am your host, Taylor Gibson, and I'll see you next time.